So joining me today is David Levy. He is the CEO of the Jerome Levy Forecasting Center. Thank you, David, for taking the time to talk with me today.
Pleasure.
So would you like to give a short introduction about yourself and what your company does?
Yeah. Well, let me start with what my company does, because I'm afraid if I start with my introduction and the history of the company and how I got into this crazy family business, what was originally family business, it's not entirely so now. The story gets too long. Basically, what we have a unique, not entirely unique now, but it was for a long time, unique way of looking at the macro economy, focusing on how the economy generates profits, not looking at the business cycle, not just from the point of view of what is making real GDP go up or down faster, but looking at what are the flows of funds that are actually causing businesses to become more profitable, which according to certainly agree with the basic theory, which is the mainstream theory in this, which is more profits, businesses want to do more, they want to expand, they want to hire more people, and that's critical to what runs the economy. This is inherently, it's a financial view of how the economy works, and I say that because it's the actual dollars and cents being spent rather than focusing on the physical output. So we care, businesses don't care how much real GDP they produced, whether if they're selling cars or pineapples or whatever they don't care if their products are in real terms or inflation adjusted or worth a certain amount more than they were the year before. They care how much, what are their expenses and what are their revenue, and that's really what this approach focuses on. And it also ties into other financial issues that have become very important. For example, in the financial crisis, also in the great NASDAQ stock bubble that we had in 2000, and other times, the Japanese bubble economy that broke down in the 90s. And I would argue there are a few more that are forming and vulnerable right now. So it's a way that enables us to have some different insights, and we consult for mostly financial clients, people who are involved in trying to make financial decisions, either in private equity, which means they own a lot of businesses that they're trying to manage and possibly sell off later. So they want to know about business and financial environment for that. And many are actually in the investing business one way or another, and they're interested in our perspective. So we offer them a little bit of a different view, and we've been doing this for a very long time. The long family history I alluded to, this work point of view was originally discovered by my grandfather in obscurity about, over 100 years ago, about 110 years ago. And he, because he got interested in the problem of unemployment, and as a businessman, he said, well, I know profits sometimes are better than others, and what makes that happen? This view was actually discovered by somebody else about a generation later. I won't go into the gory details, but anyway, it remained a sort of a sideline in mainstream economics and never really got a lot of attention. I think not partly because of our work, and in large part, I think because a famous economist called Hyman Minsky, who wrote a whole lot about financial instability and market crashes and economic declines and things, did also use this approach somewhat, which we call the profits perspective. That's a relatively modern name for an old approach. So there are a few people now who are paying a little bit more attention, but we have many years of experience. My father started a business with his grandfather. With my grandfather in the 1940s. This is after my grandfather had sold everything, including his business and all the stocks, on the eve of the Great Depression, retired unscathed. Over the years, it's been very helpful to our family, and we've tried to share some of that with clients. So that's essentially what we do.
Yeah. And where I'd like to start is just kind of like a broad kind of where we are moment, from like the onset of COVID almost more than 2 years ago. Feels like it's been forever.
Yes.
But like at a consumer level, seems like we're kind of at a stage where we've done like the most we can to come back to normalcy in terms of like being vaccinated and boosted, and like people have been wearing masks and such. Um, so I'd be curious like to hear like how you, if we feel like we're at a stage where we can move on, not just from this consumer perspective, but also from a business perspective.
Well, I think that there's certainly in the United States, I'm going to draw some distinctions as we go around the world. Business has been overall, now not if you're in, for example, the cruise ship business necessarily, who had a, not too popular during the pandemic, but for most overall, American business has done very well, in large part because of we had much larger government efforts in this country than elsewhere, much heavier spending to during the pandemic. I think overall, we can question whether we spent a little bit more than we needed to over the past year, but overall during the pandemic, it's created a lot of profitability, and businesses are now very, very eager to pick up with investing and doing, and they're in a very good position to, in many cases, long-term investment that got neglected, even things that, for example, like becoming reducing carbon footprints or advancing electric versus internal combustion engines in various applications, and also just in taking advantage of any kind of business opportunity. So there's a tremendous amount of energy in the U.S. economy, and businesses want to spend. And as everybody knows, if you know anybody who's tried to buy even a used car, and what's happened, the prices of the shortage of cars, because there's been a problem building new cars around the world. We have there are a number of supply chain issues that have been interfering with how things operate, and so that's businesses are trying extra hard because to rebuild their inventories, which they need to function. I know, for example, when I go to weird things happen when I go to the store and I try to find my wife's and my favorite brand of 85% chocolate bars, that they only for weeks at certain chains they say, well, we only have the 70 and the 95. We can't get the 85 right now. But that may have other stories behind it. But more importantly, there are a lot of key things for manufacturers. There are also, obviously, we have now on top of this all the disruptions and fear disruptions, which may even be bigger, relating to the unfortunate situation in Ukraine. So there are a lot of things that are causing business to try almost extra hard to try to catch up. Consumers, as you mentioned, are and your audience knows as well as anybody, consumers are very eager not only to get back to normal, and are starting to do so in more and more ways, but in many cases to even catch up for things they didn't do. Anybody who was planning a big trip that they couldn't go on and had to put it off because it wasn't safe, or there were restrictions on travel, may now be trying to do it now. I mean, even something, my daughter got married last September. She was supposed to be married the previous September. We held that off because of COVID. Fortunately, she was able to still book a place to have it, because she did it, about a year and a half in advance when she made the switch. There's a huge problem. People finding places to get married. Everything is backed up. So there are a lot of aspects of consumer spending which involve where we're seeing consumers at least trying to spend, not just back to normal levels, going back to normal activities, but in many ways catch up, go out. If they used to go to out to dinner once a week, and they didn't go out to dinner for a couple of years, they're eager to go out to dinner, maybe a couple times a week right now. And who cares if they spend a little bit more? They're so happy to do it. So answer is basically, I think, is right now in the United States, it's a tremendous amount of strength in the economy. We have things that can affect that. And I would also emphasize it's not the same in all the world. China's having continued problems, some of the biggest shutdowns since Wuhan now, and that they could get worse because they can't control Omicron as well as the original forms of COVID. And they're shutting down ports, and they're shutting down manufacturing, they're shutting down cities, they're having a very rough time with that, and that's affecting other parts of the world as well. There are also some a new strain in Europe, apparently. I don't know that much about, but again, we hope this is, we've seen the worst here. We do have, although not everybody's taken advantage of it, we do have access here, and a lot of people have had some of the best vaccines that are available, so that we do have a certain level of more confidence that we're safe. People who are my age who are more worried about this than people your age, Vishnu, than so forth. But there are a lot of cross currents right now. But the net effect, at least for the at least running well into summer, I think in the U.S. is going to be a very, very strong economy. Unfortunately, also an inflationary one, but a strong one.
Definitely. And you mentioned like the idea of consumers trying to catch up to like lost kind of period of demand, and that's kind of created this supply demand disequilibrium. Do you have any take on like which of those like factors, like supply or demand, like is kind of more responsible for this huge inflation that we're all experiencing?
Well, I think inflation is usually a multi-part story, and I would say that certainly part of that story is related to shortages of certain types of mostly goods, and both commodities and finished goods, that largely developed in 2021. But there's also a part of it which is more concerning, and because it's more ongoing, and that is a form of compensation inflation, and that's really primarily in the United States, not so much elsewhere. That's also because our economy was very strong, and what's happened is we've had first of all, we had a lot of households were given cushions to help them get through a period when if they were unemployed for a while, which I think in many ways was I think it was a good thing overall. There's some, we can, there are some legitimate criticisms of the programs and so forth. I don't want to get into the tiny things, but we got through pretty well. But one of the things is we didn't anticipate how much people would start changing their way they're living. They said, well, instead of two of us working and two of us, if you have a married couple or not married couple, or two people living together, under what any circumstances, forming a household, and they were both commuting and to work and coming back, and maybe said, this doesn't make sense. One of us will work, the other will work part-time, and plus we can work remotely more. And if actually one of us gets a different job, we could actually move to this other place where it's cheaper to live, and we can have other amenities. And people are just rethinking a lot, and there are a lot of people, I think retired people, who said, I'll never, and I have a lot of peers like this, in my local community, in fact, it seems more of our friends are older than we are than younger, and I am officially past the retirement age, although I'm not retired. The tendency is, for a lot of people who said, I don't know, if I retired, if I worked at home, what would I do? I'd go nuts. And then they had to do it for a while, and they say, you know what, this is really nice, going out and playing golf, a couple times a week, and seeing people and relaxing and doing, So now these are people who are, for the most part, are affluent enough, and it's an easy decision. But there are lots of people who have various, sets of choices. And one of the things that's happened is a lot of people didn't come right back into the labor force, and some of them probably won't. So that has created some tightness in the labor market. We have shortages of particular types of skills. Truck drivers became a problem very early because there was such a huge demand for moving goods. Because we shifted from buying, we weren't going out, we weren't traveling, but we were buying things for our homes like mad. People getting, the Peloton bike, or whatever you call it.
Yeah.
So it was a huge example of that. I know my daughter and son-in-law, who were with us part of the time, they managed to get one of those things that's still sitting up in her bedroom. I think it's going to move out, but I hope so. Anyway, I need a home office. I need a more comfortable chair because I'm going to be in it all the time, or I'm not going to my club, so I want to exercise at home. I want to buy a bike. All these things that happen, and the ability to ship these goods and get them into the country was a problem. So there was a huge demand for truck drivers, and then it happened to warehousing. Then we see it now. It became an issue. It's become a big issue now at restaurants, because a lot of the people who were just working basically for tips and very low wages in a lot of restaurants found out, or some restaurants where they didn't even get tips, that gee, there are a lot of other opportunities now. And restaurants found that if they wanted to keep staying in business, they needed to pay more. And so a lot of things are changing. And once people have gotten the idea that prices are going up, and that what they consider sort of a normal fair pay. I mean, we've had pretty stable inflation, low inflation for a very long time, and pretty stable, companies had stable policies about who got how much raise when. It's suddenly, that all broke down. The last time we saw everything break down like this was, I would say, the late 1960s, when again people were used to having a rising standard of living, more so than we have now, and they would get a small pay increase, but it turned into it really meant something. And now a lot of people are, but then what happened then was for the Vietnam War spending and the introduction of Great Society programs, which all diverted some of their income, and they weren't getting as much, and they experienced this in terms of inflation going up. Then we had oil shortage and other commodity shortages in the early 70s, and a lot of things happened, and we had a complete breakdown. People saying, wait a minute, this isn't fair. I need not my usual 3% annual raise. I need 6% or 10% or whatever. And we had a breakdown. And then we started institutionalizing it by putting something called COLAs, or cost of living adjustments, into contracts, for example. So I automatically get inflation next year plus some other raise on top of it. So we're having a similar period where people say the old rules don't matter. Hey, I can get a better job here. I'm not going to just take this. And I'm paying more for gas, and I'm paying more for all these other things, and I can't even get a newer car, and it costs me a lot to service this old jalopy that keeps breaking down. So I need to, and people are getting. And once that breaks down, it sounds great. Yes, people should be paid more, and that'd be lovely. But if everybody in the economy, and I really emphasize, I'm including everybody from the CEO to the the lowest paid worker. All of them collectively, if their collective pay goes up faster, then it's going to also make costs go up faster. So it's basically it becomes a self-defeating process. That's why what's referred to as a wage price spiral, and that's what I am afraid we're getting into now. Now, I think what will stop it is when we have the next big breakdown in the economy. We'll have a lot more unemployment. There will also be a lot of other wealth losses and some other things, and the markets will change abruptly, and those pay increases will come down. But right now, I think the initial fact I would say would be, in the United States, it's primarily a combination of shortages of certain things, and that some cases that's because of very, very strong demand that was stronger than was there before. In some cases, just supply problems, but also shortages of workers that have aggravated this, and the combination. We're now at a point where I think people are looking aggressively for when they look for a raise. People they expect more, and if they're not going to get more, they're going to be looking more at other opportunities. And employers know, well, gee, I may want to hold the line on but I can't afford to lose my best people, or lose everybody. So and that's where I would be very concerned about this. If inflation becoming a very big issue, if I thought we would be able to sustain this kind of very strong inflationary growth for very long, I think something's going to break down.
Right. And diving deeper into like the supply problems of the shortages, do you think it was kind of like a flaw in the general structure of our supply chain, like an accident kind of waiting to happen with our over reliance on like processes like just-in-time manufacturing?
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of putting it, Vishnu. And I think, in fact, we had a whole bunch of accidents happen at once. The history of the so-called just-in-time inventory system, which with the idea being that you have the best communication possible between all the final sales, and if a consumer good, it's the retailer, the wholesaler, the manufacturer, and then the suppliers of the manufacturer, so that everybody knows what's going on. They know what has to be where, when, and they can synchronize it as closely as possible. Everybody needs to have some inventories on hand to deal with, if something doesn't show up quite on time, but they want to keep that to a minimum. This came out of the Japanese model. One of a number of things that made the Japanese were very successful, I should say, in the 1970s, in large part because of their operations management. That's their how they actually run their businesses and do it efficiently and do it in intelligent ways. Everything from human resource management to the actual, as I said, operations, where you're trying to figure out what are the logistics, or how are we going to set up, and how are we going to cut down on wastage, and how do we, and they were really good on a lot. And one of the things they did that they were admired for was this just-in-time inventory. And in the 1970s, we had a great deal of inflation and everything, including commodities. That was basically adjusted during the 1980s. We had the twin recessions, and the 82 recession was still in some ways until, the COVID recession was sort of as a little bit different because things were shut down. It wasn't just purely shut down because of economic phenomena, but there, was otherwise really the worst post-war recession, I would say, in my experience. And as a result of that, businesses were faced with huge losses, deflation in the goods and inventory. So if you're holding a lot in inventory, it's great if the prices keep going. If you buy oil 1 year and you 1 month, and you're not going to use it for 2 more months, and meanwhile the price is going up, well, you've made a profit by buying and having actually more in inventory. On the other hand, if prices are going down, it's just the opposite. You paid a whole lot for this oil, you can't sell it for that price. And that goes for parts and anything else you have in inventory. So then also interest rates were much above the inflation rate at that point. In the 70s, they had been below it because inflation had been high and interest rates hadn't caught up. So it didn't cost, the gain in the value of what was in inventory was greater than what you were paying to finance it with in terms of interest. That reversed in the 1980s. Suddenly you had it was going to cost you pay a very high interest rate, double-digit interest rates, 12%, 14% to finance inventories, and maybe the price, general inflation was only 5%, and in fact your commodities might even have been falling in price. So you had a strong incentive to have as little in inventory as possible, and the Japanese model was very appealing. It's also very appealing when you're getting more and more globalized. You're increasingly using sources that are around the world, so you really need to synchronize. You want to keep everything as smooth, and if you can count on that, then you develop this very efficient global system where there's not a whole lot of need for inventories, and things work very well. And that's really what the way we've been operating up until I would say before COVID. It was really, I think, the increasing trade tensions in 2018 and then into 19 between US and China, and there were some embargoes and some tariffs and some threats, and people were starting to worry about getting things, and that was disruptive. But the real thing was when COVID came along, and suddenly there were all kinds of problems getting a hold of things. And what people realize is not only do we have a political risk that maybe we won't be able to get the things we count on, but there can be other kinds of disruptions, and we won't be able to get things from countries we want. And that became a big problem. The other thing is that even if people hadn't changed their philosophy and hadn't decided that these disruptions were a problem, the system just could not handle the swing in demand we had. We had starting in March of 2020, which was the month where all the shutdowns really started to happen. I mean, we shut our business down and started working remotely about March 12th, and I think by the 18th was when it was kind of, now the government was telling everybody to do it. There was retail sales just fell off. Nobody was buying anything. Everyone went home and said, "What's going on?" But within a couple of months, especially because people were getting income supplements, there was the payroll protection program where small businesses could actually basically take out a loan to keep paying their workers, uh, even if those workers couldn't really do anything and the companies didn't have the business. And then later that loan would be forgiven. So it was basically a grant. There were people getting extra unemployment benefits, and people were still working and still earning their paychecks, but doing it from home, and we're not commuting, we're not going out to restaurants for lunch or whatever they were doing. So there was a lot of money to spend, and people said, all right, now I'm home, I'm going to buy all those, I'm going to set up my office at home. Well, we're spending all this time, the house always felt a little cramped. We're thinking of redoing this place. Yeah, let's add that, let's finish off the back porch and close it in like we were planning to do. Whatever it is, people start to spend a ton of money. So what happens? Demand goes from below normal, sharply below normal, to way above normal at a time when there's also problems with delivery, problems with manufacturing in some countries where, because of COVID, problems shipping things, with the ports being crowded or too many people being sick, or you name it. We've had all sorts of things. So the inability of this very fine-tuned, just-in-time system to handle these dramatic swings at a time, by the way, when carrying inventories is not that expensive. First of all, there was, prices have been going up again, or at least they were stable for most of recent years and tending to go up, I would say, for most commodities. And interest rates have been incredibly low. Even now, they're rising and they're moving up. They're still historically very, very low. These are not, and they're well below the inflation rate. So the idea of actually, when you realize you can't run your business because, let's say you're an automaker and you have everything you need to, or almost everything you need to make a car, and you have demand and you want to sell them, and this huge, you can sell them very profitably, except you can't make very many because the chips that are used that control the brains of the car, the computers in the cars these days, which are essential, are in serious short supply, and you can't get enough, so you're not producing. Next time when you have back orders for the next 3 years of chips, you're trying to do anything you can to get them, you can be sure those companies are going to carry years worth of chips from now on. I mean, nobody wants, they're moving from just in time to just in case. So there's this whole transition between the political risk, and we're seeing it again now with the embargo, or the embargo against against Russian exports, the fact that things can't come out of Ukraine, and the problems, meanwhile, other problems like the Chinese COVID problems becoming very, very severe again, problems in South Korea. In the middle of all this, Japan has another serious earthquake that messes up production of their autos. It's a world that is pushing people to say, you know what, we have to go to a different kind of system with more buffers, larger inventories, more room to deal with uncertainties. And by the way, one thing as Americans, we can say, well, this is good for us because it's one of many things that's moving manufacturing back to the United States. I think it was starting to happen anyway, because the idea of moving largely for cheap labor doesn't make as much sense at a time when automation is doing more and more of the direct labor work in manufacturing, and so that there are other things that such as how close are you to your customer, how quickly can you respond to an order, other things. So very complicated soup of things going on, but I think these accidents waiting to happen, and not just one but a whole bunch of them, and I think that there's a revolution in inventory management and in how we set up our production and distribution networks that are underway now. Also, by the way, we were already in the middle of a revolution in how we distribute goods and services because of the internet and online buying and on and on. So it's from one point of view a very exciting time, because a lot of changes, and changes is usually good for the economy, a lot of new things, but it's also obviously a time of some pretty frightening things going on in parts of the world that hopefully will get resolved in relatively favorable ways. But all of these things are adding uncertainty, and not just as a gee, we don't know what to happen, but things that really importantly do impact how the economy operates.
Yeah, for sure. And I think from a different angle, like I think there are people who'd say that, oh, like who cares about like the inflation? Who cares about like the imbalance in the supply and demand? Like look at like GDP right now. Look at consumer demand. Like this is all in the face of like the Omicron variant. Like why we take that as like a net win? Is that how you kind of see it, or do you even
Well,
think there are
I mean,
valid arguments?
there's so many different issues and questions and things that matter in economics, depending to whom and what's our context. You make a point, which is that the consumer demand has been very strong despite Omicron. We did see during the winter sharp reductions in certain types of consumer spending,
Mhm.
things you'd expect. The travel fell off some, not as much as it had at other times. I think people have got more people are less afraid of traveling, even when Omicron, when there's a lot of COVID around on airplanes than they were. But there is we had so much other demand that's coming through despite this. Also, there's just to also mention that some of the strength in the last few months in consumer spending is simply paying higher prices because inflation has hit so much. And that's, but the fact is, from a business point of view, well, the dollars are coming in. It may cost us more to get this stuff, but consumers are coming up with the dollars and spending it. So I think consumer, and as I indicated earlier, I think consumers are going to be spending very, very heavily, probably more on services. That's where the real pickup will be, I think, relative to what we've seen before, but they'll continue to spend on goods. And there are a lot of people, you couldn't get a bicycle last year because they all sold out, and there are people, if they can get them back in, they'll be buying them, a lot of them this year as well. And certainly with automobiles, when they're able to get them in, people will be buying them. So I think that is going on, but at the same time now, who cares about inflation? I'll tell you, people whose incomes are not rising as fast as the prices, and it's particularly who are on a tight budget, and almost everybody, even if you're the people who would be considered by many standards, very affluent, nevertheless they spend most of what they make, or they have maybe a certain amount put in retirement plans or whatever, but they don't have huge cushions, and they don't want to something that cuts into that a lot is unwelcome. Social Security did have a big increase as adjusted for inflation, but even it didn't increase quite as much as prices went up. It's also not an even effect. People who live, if you're in a rural part of the country, where you have to drive long distances to get to work, to get and it's likely that gasoline is a much bigger part of your budget than for the average American. If you live in Manhattan, well, you may have other expenses and things, but chances are you don't have a car, or if you have a car, it's somewhere where kept somewhere where you take it out on weekends if you leave the city maybe, but you're not it's not over there. So there are a lot of people who are hit by it, and it also, one of the things that it makes it very difficult for people who are in the financial industry, and anybody who's concerned about their their retirement savings or their savings for colleges, whatever. If they have a certain money put away, and that money now has to grow as fast as inflation just to stay, not to lose ground. And if they're trying to build it up, it creates a huge amount of stress. I mean, and what happens? Interest rates are going up now to fight inflation. One of the effects is it tends to reduce the stock market. It also tends to reduce bond values, and overall, people, it's very, there's no easy way you can make money now. I mean, you really have to. It's a very tricky thing, and that may seem like a lot of people who say, "Well, that's great. I wish I had money that I had to worry about," but for a lot of Americans on different levels, whether it's saving money for college, or saving money for retirement, or saving up to buy a house, these are very, very, concerning times. It's interesting just to measure how much people care. If you look at consumer confidence, it's come down quite a lot despite all these the very strong job market, which is usually the number one thing that affects how people feel about the economy. Can I get a job? Can I keep a job? Can I, and what is that situation? Despite that being very, very favorable, people are, the two surveys, one, the Michigan, the university survey is showing the lowest, the lowest consumer confidence or consumer sentiment, they call it, since the bottom of the financial crisis. Much worse than even during the COVID shutdowns of 2020, and it's because of inflation. It's really it is very upsetting to people, and it affects almost everybody. If unemployment is an issue, those people don't have jobs, or who would like to change jobs and don't think they can get another one, they're unhappy. But most people are okay. Inflation affects almost everybody.
Right. And it happened, right? Like the Fed increased interest rates recently, but I mean, I don't want to call it like an overreaction, but do you feel like this is like a quick fix? Or are there other underlying factors at play that maybe just an increase in interest rates isn't going to solve for this inflation?
Well, the Federal Reserve has come to occupy a position of almost sort of mystic reverence. I don't know, held in looked upon with great reverence as these people who make these subtle moves that are just right, and they therefore, we know they're doing the right thing, therefore we're all confident that inflation will stay low, so therefore we won't do anything that will push prices or costs up, or wages up, and everything will be fine. The fact is that that's not how the economy works. There are other things that brought inflation down, and the Fed really got a lot of credit. I mean, there are things they've done that I don't have big disagreements with a lot, but I think the idea that the Fed really can control inflation. Look, even if you go back to the so-called monetarists, Milton Friedman, people like that, going back to the 1970s and 80s, they said, look, the way the way monetary policy can stop and can slow inflation is by slowing the economy, and by raising the cost of borrowing and slowing activity and weakening the economy, and that's how you do it. And the only way you can get there, is it's a crude tool and it takes time to work, but that's what you have to do. And we've now gotten to the point where people think, well, how the Fed communicates, and the fact that they have dot plots, which is a little tool that the Fed publishes after each of their meetings, or showing on a chart where each member, without mentioning who's who, thinks interest rates are going, and this is very helpful to markets and very important. And the fact is, interest rates have to go up a lot more to really substantially affect most of the economy. Housing might be an exception, but even so, they'd have to go up more. They're not. Housing is staying strong now. It's not going to be weakened by these increases. The problem is, in this world where we have these enormous balance sheets, enormous debt levels, including in the United States, but worse in other places, there is going to be rising interest rates are going to cause financial instability, crashing markets, defaults, liquidity problems, banking problems, other things that will take down the economy before rising interest rates through traditional means, which would be to slow down business borrowing, slow down consumer borrowing. Nobody's going to use a credit card any less because the Fed raised 25 basis points, or even if when they get to the end of the year, if as they expect, they've raised them about two full percentage points. I'm not getting 25 basis points, a quarter of a percentage point, what they just did. So I think that we're a little bit. There is no monetary policy that can really fix this situation. We're in between a rock and a hard place. We had these very low interest rates to keep the economy going through difficult times. And what they've done is they've created a whole lot of financial wealth that is not sustainable and is going to break down at some point, unfortunately. And once it does, and it's a painful process, and hopefully we can manage it reasonably well. We can do it better here than they can, certainly in some other countries. It will pave the way for a much more healthy period, because I think in the very long run, and again, if Vishnu, for your age cohort, I mean, you'll be starting out, where there may be some adjustments early in your lives, but you're going to see, I think, tremendous prosperity coming out of all the changes we have to make, most of which will be for decades ahead to combating global warming, which we won't be able to, probably even in your lifetime, won't be able to stop, but we'll be able to hopefully limit it. And there'll be, all the changes in tech, robotics, better, new innovations using communication. There's so many medical changes, people being able to live in different places than they were ever lived before, because they don't need to physically be as close for a lot of things as they once were. There are a lot of, I think, really exciting, positive things that to look forward to, just purely speaking in terms of economic development. A lot of it has to do with overcoming challenges, and challenges. The challenges may be scary. Certainly the environmental challenges are scary, but I think, when people get scared enough, they react. Pretty societies react, and I think we will, and we'll find a way to cope. But I want to emphasize, right now, things are so overvalued, debt levels are so high, and this will not hold up with interest rates that are so low that they're promoting more and more, crazy borrowing, and there's really nothing the Fed can do. I think they have to. They don't want to do anything that's going to disturb markets and upset things anymore. But I don't think they really. I think they have much less ability to manage the situation than most people believe.
Yeah, and on the flip side, do you feel like there are certain risk factors in certain places that are kind of being underreacted to?
Yeah, I think the whole question of financial instability, the emerging markets is sort of the area which I'm most concerned about, because I think that's where the greatest vulnerability is. And the emerging market sector, if we include China, grew from, I guess we go back to, we go back, say 30 years or so, or 40 years, we'd be looking at something that would be maybe 20% of the global population, maybe not even that. But don't quote me. That number may be a little off, but something. But and it got up to be over 40% of the global economy, and that's so it's big. It matters a lot. China has probably the greatest, for any big country, and it's a very big country, the greatest financial excesses, which is now the leadership, who I don't think really, who knows a great deal about power and politics within the Chinese Communist Party and various other things, and maybe be I'll leave someone else to debate how shrewd he is in terms of international dealings and other things. But what he does not have a background in, and I don't think is much of leadership does, is in a very tricky thing, which is, what do you do when you have an economy that's already grown enormously on a huge amount of borrowing and speculation, initially very well based because there was so much manufacturing growth, but they kept building manufacturing, investing more and more, as if they could keep growing and having bigger share of the world economy forever. But the world's only so big, and the world slowed down as well, and there were limits. So they started having to rely more on building infrastructure, and they overdid that, and tried to do it very, very rapidly in ways that were not very effective, and they have a lot of financial problems from that. So the next thing was to pour money into real estate development, and the local governments were able to sell huge amounts of land leases. You can't own land in China, but you can own a lease for a very long time. So it's effectively like owning the land. And there was a huge amount of borrowing and a lot of money spent developing, and all at prices that were not sustainable. And things now, buildings that can't pay for themselves, developers who are in financial trouble, local governments that are in all kinds of financial trouble, and the only way they can really manage this, and it's a tricky thing to manage, is if the central government, if the central government of China will actually borrow and spend a lot of money itself. And it doesn't seem to want to do that, doesn't seem to understand. And from what the comments we make, I think the top leadership doesn't necessarily understand that. And this is not to be overly critical of Chinese leadership in this. I mean, look, we had our supposedly very financially sophisticated country here with the Federal Reserve and other people who didn't understand how financially fragile our whole economy was because of the housing bubble. They understood their excesses in the market. They didn't understand how it could take the whole system down, which I mean, was one of the things from the profits perspective. You look at it, you understand the role of all this balance sheet expansion, how much wealth, and you're able to understand how much of the profits of the economy during that boom were coming directly or indirectly from the housing market. And most of it was not even the home building. It was just all the wealth that was created. People were borrowing money and spending more against it, as if, it was just a form of basically spending borrowed money. So bringing this back, I think China has problems. They do have the power in their government, the financial strength, so they can work through this somehow. If they don't do, but it's going to be very difficult for them. And most of the rest of the emerging markets, they don't have capital controls. They'll immediately get a lot of capital flight. China may have some problems of that sort too, although they do have a lot of controls. I think we're going to have a lot of defaults. In the old days, and even now, if there's an individual country, the latest case, it seems like a chronic offender is Argentina, where they go to the IMF and they have to get some other loan or negotiate a new loan because they couldn't pay the old loan. But the IMF does not have nearly the resources to deal with a major part of the emerging market sector. And I think if we look at, there are going to be a lot of problems in Eastern Europe, not only because of those directly affected by the war. Even if that war is resolved, there could be a lot more sense in Western Europe about being not too dependent on Eastern Europe. There are going to be a whole lot of other things, and just a lot of fear and uncertainty about what's going to happen that will make it difficult. So I'm concerned that we will have at some point a major global emerging market crisis, and that it's big enough to trigger problems in the entire economy, including the United States. So that's the dark side. I think we have to go through some difficult adjustments, and the risks are that we might get to that because of the rising interest rates. On the other hand, with all the uncertainty, new COVID cases, new disruptions, changes in timing, possible change in the geopolitical situation, hopefully something more favorable in Europe. Other things can happen that change the timing. So I'm not sitting here saying, the world is coming to an end, or at least parts of it are the expansion and financial stability are going to be hit necessarily in the next year. Although I think the risks are very real that something could begin here. I do think, though, there are some difficult adjustments that will then pave the way for I think so much better times. But that's there's again the layers of story here, and you brought out several of them. From all the supply chain revolution and the problems there, and trying to get around it, to the COVID, and where we think we're out of the woods, and I hope we're out of the woods, but we don't know if another wave is going to come that's going to cause more problems. We don't know what problems will cause in other parts of the world. There are other political issues going on. Just the how Western Europe is going to change because of what its concerns about defense and security now. Just a lot of things on our plate, and maybe the one that we really should be worried about, would like to be worried about and doing something about, most for, I think, are really the environmental and particularly global warming issues, which are certainly fundamental to our survival and well-being. And I think we will deal with them, but we'll deal with them too late. And it'd be nice if we weren't distracted by a war in the Ukraine, and we could be paying a little bit more attention to that right now.
Yeah, definitely. And like to kind of put like a bow on this whole like situation, like what are I guess some of the most important lessons you've learned from like applying the profits perspective and the history of like you like forecasting like these certain recessions that are about to happen? Like how do you kind of use that to bake in the uncertainty that's coming from geopolitical tensions, COVID related matters, supply chain issues?
Well, I think some of it is if you've been surprised enough times, you come away with I think a greater appreciation for the kinds of things that can happen, and just even when you can't identify a particular risk, that the fact that things can come out of left field. Um, I knew some people who had a big investment in an Alaskan pipeline many years ago, and they were convinced that there was no way this could fail. It was going to make money. It was a great investment, and I forget exactly what company they were investing in or any of that. And then it turned out somebody figured out that the plan for the pipe was going to prevent the migration of the caribou, and this would be an environmental and ecological disaster affecting the whole ecosystem and all that. And the whole thing got put on hold. Eventually, I think they raised the pipes or did something so that the caribou could go underneath it. Whatever happened, but the point is, you never know that. So that they always refer to a caribou as something that could come out with any investment plan or any business plan or any other economic plan for a country. You think you have everything figured out, and some caribou shows up you never thought about. I think that there are a lot of caribou, and I've seen some of them, and I think, but I think also there's you see both very positive things you see and some negative things. You see how foolish people can be, especially collectively, and how powerful the peer forces are to make people believe in bubbles when they're ongoing, and how they can just keep going longer and longer than you think they should. I mean, for example, the housing market was falling. In 2005, we hit a peak in sales. By 2006, we had hit a peak in prices. Housing starts had turned down right around the end of the year 2005, and the market was clearly declining, all through 2010. It wasn't until 2007 that mortgage lenders, based on this as a survey done by the Federal Reserve, stopped making credit terms on mortgages easier. Even though the collateral that they were just so eager to get these loans out, they were giving home equity loans, letting people take out huge amounts of the equity in their homes as cash, even though that equity was in the process of shrinking. They just, it was just so much inertia built into this industry, and people just kept doing things like this, and until it blows up, and everyone says, "How could we all been so foolish?"
Yeah.
The other side, though, is I think that when things fall apart and get in trouble, there are some very powerful forces, and people can really be very, I think, innovative, and in ways that really can help things recover. And that's one of the great strengths of our country, I think, is that we, although it's maybe in some ways we've got a little bit older, more staid, but I think the fact, a lot of it has to do, I think, the fact that this has remained an economy that's always had a lot of waves of immigration, even though that has been a controversial issue to a lot of people in recent years. It's one of the things that I think has added to this culture here that we have of there's somebody willing to come in and work very hard for something new, and I'm not just talking about how hard people work at work. I think, but I think just also the chance to do things, just having new blood, new thinking, new ideas percolating through the society, I think. But on the other hand, there are also homogeneous countries that have had. I mean, Germany is certainly one. I mean, although I know they have particularly a lot of Turkish people who come but it's overall much more homogeneous and stable, or more static society than ours, and yet they've been repeatedly been over years been innovative, highly productive, and bounce back from a lot of things. So there are, I'm not sure where this is all going. I guess I just kind of talking about that there are some, if you have an economic system which supports it, and I think, and a culture that supports it, and part of that culture is respect for basic law, which is what, for example, Russia didn't have, and why their economy never was able to function. They had a culture of cheating and extortion and embezzlement. Was just sort of how their old economy worked, and they never were able to get away from that. So there's a lot. I think we'll cope with whatever comes along, but it's there's some challenges, certainly.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's really well put way to summarize this whole situation. So I think it's a really great place for us to end. So just want to say thank you for David for taking time.
Thank you for having me on, Vishnu, and it's been a very interesting conversation, and I commend your audience for having interest in all these issues, and good luck with it going forward.
For sure. Awesome. Well, appreciate it.
Okay. Take care.